And this one is perhaps in some ways more appropriate. I'm going to read from Geoff in Venice, Death in Varanasi, which takes place, first of all, in Venice. I should say this, actually, that the novels I've written, there's 4 of them, but there's 3 of them that are sort of similar. There's The Colour of Memory, which is set in Brixton in London, Group of Friends, romance. Then comes Paris Trance, Group of Friends, romance, set in Paris. And then comes this one, which is Venice and Varanasi, Group of Friends, romance. But you'll note that the locations have become progressively more exotic. Brixton, Paris, Venice, Varanasi. And also you'll notice I've gone through the alphabet. So it really is, there's nothing more to come in terms of geography and fiction. So, Heatwave in Venice. This, the protagonist is this sort of washed-up, middle-aged journalist who's called Geoff. But lest you think that there's some sort of identification between author and subject, let me show you the cover. Geoff, Geoff, me. Geoff, Jeff, which proves to you that it is fiction. So those of you who are here on the NYU fiction program, I mean, I know you're here for, I don't know, however long it is, and it's however long the MFA is, but that's really all there is to fiction. You just change the names. But I don't know, you can spin, and the faculty managed to spin that out for a whole month here because they like being in Paris, I think. But yeah, that's the essential lesson. So, Heatwave in Venice, he goes to cover the opening of the Venice Biennale. And at one of the parties, he meets this American woman called Laura. And they get on really well. There's loads of sort of repartee. But then she won't give him her phone number. She says, I'm sure you're going to, you'll see me again in Venice. So what then follows is a kind of version, a very contemporary version of Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, as he's in pursuit of this American woman. And whereas the composer who goes to Venice in the Thomas Mann novel he's a great composer, here I say it's all happening lower down the sort of cultural ladder with this journalist called Jeff Atman. And we're going to pick up the story, I mean, if we can dignify it with the word story, because I mean story has never been a strong point of mine. When at the opening of the Venice Biennale, where all of the art world descends on Venice, there are lots of parties. And this is one of the parties. It was an unusual night in that there was no dinner for Ed Ruscha. The reason there was no dinner for Ed Ruscha was because there was a party for Ed Ruscha. Geoff only realised this, that the party at the Peggy Guggenheim collection was actually in honour of Ed Ruscha, as he checked the thick, heavily embossed invite on his way over. By the time he arrived, there must have been 1,000 people stuffed into the garden, and hundreds more, the great uninvited, trying to get in. It was as if the government of Venice had fallen, and the last helicopters were about to take off from the Guggenheim before the victorious armies of Florence or Rome occupied the city. Invite in hand, he was ushered through the gates by the scrupulously polite security. Inside, everyone was belting back Bellinis as usual. The waiters were struggling to cope with the insatiable demand for Bellinis. There was barely room to move, and around the drinks table it was mayhem. Geoff had got it into his head that risotto had been promised. He assumed he'd got this idea from the invite, but there was no mention of it there, and at present no risotto was in evidence. In view of the numbers, producing risotto was an absurdly ambitious and labour-intensive undertaking. But it seemed that Geoff was not alone in expecting risotto. The risotto and its potential non-appearance was in fact the chief topic of conversation in the garden. People were counting on risotto to line their stomachs. A lack of risotto would have had a significant impact on their ability to belt back Bellinis. From the balcony of the gallery itself, a bearded American ambassador was pleading for calm, or at least trying to get everyone to quieten down for a few minutes so he could give a speech. When the hubbub subsided, the bearded dignitary welcomed Ed Ruscha, praising him to the skies, explaining what an honour it was to have him here and what an important artist he was. At the end, he asked everyone to raise a glass to Ed Ruscha, which, though fair enough, was pretty superfluous, since the only time during his speech people had stopped raising their glasses was while getting them refilled by the much put-upon bar staff. And then the doors to the gallery itself opened. This was it. The risotto obviously was now being served. There was an amazing stampede as people seized on the idea that the risotto moment was imminent. Geoff was perfectly placed. He surged up the steps and found himself in the galleries, confronted not by vats of creamy risotto, but art, paintings and sculptures from the glorious heyday of modernism, Duchamp, Max Ernst, Picasso, Brancusi, when it was impossible to believe that there would come a time when all people cared about was free risotto to mop up all the free bellinis they'd been swilling in the garden. Like a flood, the crowd of people kept finding new levels within the building. Suddenly Geoff was out on the terrace, faced with the back of Marino Marini's statue of a guy on a horse, or some kind of creature anyway, with a kind of turd tail sticking out of its bronze bottom. The rider's arms were stretched out horizontally, crucified by air, or perhaps by the splendour of the view of the Grand Canal. Such was the intensity of the search for risotto that, within minutes, the terrace was jammed solid. Drinks were being served out here too, and so were some appalling bits of pastry, dried-up old things like samosas, but not as spicy. Geoff manoeuvred his way to the drinks table, where he spotted Ben Jennings. "Any sign of the risotto?" he asked. "You know, I don't think there's going to be any risotto," said Ben. He looked really downcast. Geoff could empathise with that. He was pretty devastated himself, even though he'd taken the precaution of eating several slices of pizza on the way over. "You know, they lure you here with the promise of risotto," he said, "and there is no risotto. It's not even like there's a limited quantity available on a first-come, first-served basis," said Ben. "There's absolutely none. All there is are a few miserable bellinis. Well, rather a lot of bellinis, in fairness. In fact, you've got 2 in your hands." "Oh, they go down a treat, don't they? They slip down," said Geoff, finishing his. Since they were pressed right up against the drinks table, he scooped up a couple more. A glass in each hand, Ben and Geoff made their way to the edge of the terrace, taking in the commanding view of the Grand Canal. The sun was sinking Turnerishly, about to disappear behind the buildings on the other side of the canal. The vapour trails of planes converged there too. Almost directly from them was the gritty palace. It looked a bit boring being there compared with being here. People on Vaporetti were looking up, wishing they were either up here, chucking back free bellinis, or sitting on the terrace of the gritty, paying for them through the nose.